So where are we? Isaiah chapter 25. Is there anything to say about chapter 25? Well, let's see. Oh, I thought first thing, let's take a quick delve back into what have we been doing. And I know it was the prophecy about Jerusalem was the one you were worried about. But the thing on the prophecy against Tyre, I kind of talked about a lot about why Tyre was bad, but there was one thing I did want to mention about Tyre. You know, we also mentioned in there that one of the reasons that the people in Judea didn't like Tyre was, Tyre was a very influential city. We talked about why it was destroyed, and it was kind of like a kingmaker province. People rose up there. They married off their daughters to other kingdoms and everything, and they had princes and wealthy folks, big businessmen and everything. But they also had Jezebel. Remember that? Have you ever been to a Bible study where they didn't say Jezebel like that? They always talk about Jezebel and how bad she was. Well, about 850 years before Isaiah, there was King Ahab in Israel. Not Judea, but Israel in the northern kingdom, and he married Jezebel. And when he did, he loved her enough that he brought everything she believed in down to Israel, which was nothing. I mean, she believed in idols and all that stuff. And she believed in all these kind of idols like Chemosh and, let's see, what was the other one that, were human sacrifices and all this, Molech, and all those guys. So, and a lot of those guys were, all of those countries that were surrounding Israel believed in those idol kind of things. But I thought it was worth remembering that it wasn't just what I said bad about Tyre before, but there was Jezebel. Jezebel, that was important. Let's see. In chapter 25, which we're doing today, verse 1, I will exalt you and praise your name, for in perfect faithfulness you have done wonderful things, things planned long ago. Remember all these chapters we've been doing this month? It's all bad, 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 bad. Everybody. Destruction of Babylon, destruction of, everything. He just went down one, destruction of Tyre. And even when he talked about Jerusalem, it was pretty bad about Jerusalem too. Everything was bad, bad, bad. And all of a sudden here in the first verse of chapter 25, it's almost like he's seen a glass half full. Lord, I'll exalt you. That word will, I will exalt you. Words are really important in the Bible, and sometimes the fact that he said will rather than I am exalting you might be something. I guess he means maybe as things continue to get better, what you're doing for us, I will exalt you. And maybe I've misread it completely, but there's a thought. But the whole thing, it's just a little different, a very positive start to the chapter. It's a change from all the chaos we saw in the other chapters. Okay? So there's a start. Then he goes down and says, I'll exalt you and praise your name, for in perfect faithfulness you have done wonderful things, things planned long ago. Well, there you go. He says, God, you've destroyed a lot of things, but you also did a lot of great stuff. And you planned it. What did he mean by planning things? And I went, kind of scouring around and looking, what does that possibly mean? And then go back to chapter 14, which is 11 chapters back, and Isaiah talked about that. Let's see if I can go figure out what he was saying. In chapter 14, verses 24 to 27, he said, the Lord Almighty has sworn, surely as I have planned, so will it be. And as I have purposed, so it will happen. I will crush the Assyrian on my land. Oh, he's talking about the Assyrians. That's good. That's good. He's not talking about destruction of the earth like he did last week. He's talking about the Assyrians. This is good. Good news. I will crush the Assyrian in my land. And keep in mind, when Isaiah is writing this, the Assyrians are the bad guys. They're the ones that just took over the northern kingdom, and they are the ones that are threatening Judea. Now, the Babylonians are going to threaten them down the road 100 years down the road, but right now it's the Assyrians are the bad guys. And he says, I will crush the Assyrian in my land, on my mountains. I will trample him down. His yoke will be taken from my people, and his burden removed from their shoulders. Wow, isn't it good to know that there is going to be justice, that God is going to take care of these people that have been abusing us. I think that gives us something to think about as we deal with modern day things too. Things may not be going right, but He's gonna fix it down the road here. Is there a word, patience maybe required? Patience, maybe, what are the words? Patience, prayer. Is there another P? There's gotta be one somewhere. This is the plan determined for the whole world. This is the hand stretched out over all nations. For the Lord Almighty has purposed, and who can thwart him? His hand is stretched out, and who can turn it back? Now that's all out of chapter 14, but that was kind of the reason I went there is because of that last part of verse 1, which says, you have done wonderful things planned long ago. So what did he mean by planned? That's what we were just talking about. Okay, next one. Verse 2, we're all the way to verse 2. You have made the city, you've made the city a heap of rubble, the fortified town a ruin, the foreigner's stronghold, a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. Therefore, strong peoples will honor you. Cities of ruthless nations will revere you. What is he talking about? Remember, Isaiah's a prophet. Prophets tend to talk about the future. Maybe it's not happening. Maybe all these ruins of these foreign cities aren't happening today, but they're going to happen. That's what Isaiah is talking about. And I thought, well, I'd do a little review here. You know, if you go back to Nineveh, remember Jonah went to Nineveh actually 100 years before Isaiah. Wait, I take that back. He went to Nineveh in 750. That's only 30 years, 20 or 30 years before Isaiah. And he went there, what? To get the people to understand they needed to change their ways. And Jonah hated that. Remember, he hated it so much he went to Tarshish. We talked about Tarshish last time. The furthest way in the other direction you could go. So you know, the people, you know, and Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. The Assyrians are winning every day. But you know what? It's all going to come down. They're going to lose it. In fact, in 612, which is about 110 years down the road from where we're at. Oh, maybe 103 years down the road from where we're dealing with Isaiah right now. The Babylonians are going to take over Assyria, and they are absolutely going to destroy Nineveh. Okay, Samaria gets conquered in 722 BC. Nineveh is destroyed in 612. I got that in the red up there. Jerusalem is destroyed in 586. So that's still 125 years down the road from where Isaiah is talking right now. And Babylon eventually gets conquered in 539 BC when the Persians come in. And Tyre, you know, Tyre may have gotten away with some things so far, but they're going to get destroyed too when Alexander the Great comes in 322 BC, and he levels that place. So every one of these bad, so-called bad cities, that's what he's talking about. You've made the city a heap of rubble. He's talking about God is going to make all of them heaps of rubble before it's all over. And when he does that, these people are going to have to think about maybe who's in charge of this world. Maybe they need to turn around. Okay, going into verse 4. You've been a refuge for the poor, a refuge for the needy in their distress, a shelter from the storm, and a shade from the heat. For the breath of the ruthless is like a storm against a wall, and like the heat of the desert, you silence the uproar of foreigners. As heat is reduced by the shadow of a cloud, so the song of the ruthless is stilled. You ask yourself, what's going on here? And you probably have a gut feel as you read through that about what he's talking about. Yeah, God, there's some hope there when you deal with God. You know, you feel better when you pray. You know that you can trust God. God's going to make it right in the end. And he has some good examples there. You go out here, you know, on a nice, bright, sunny day, and you're standing out there in the sun, and you just step over in the shade of a tree, and the temperature drops 10 degrees. You know, isn't that wonderful? And that's kind of what he's saying there, is that God just adds that little freshness there to things. And he says, you're doing that, and you're going to keep doing that. And he said, you silence the uproar of foreigners as heat is reduced. And you know, the people who are out there fighting you, they come into town and they're clanging their shields, they're yelling their pro-Assyrian, pro-Babylonian cheers, 2468, we want the Babylonians at the gate or something like that. I don't know. Anyhow, but everybody's got their own stuff, and they're loud, they're boisterous, they're noisy. We don't want to hear them. But he says, you silence this, especially that of the foreigners. Foreigners to Isaiah means the other people outside Judea. Let's see. On this mountain, verse 6, on this mountain, the Lord Almighty, this mountain, which mountain do we know what we're talking about? This mountain? Mount Zion, that's where Jerusalem is built. I love Jerusalem. It was always a challenge for we Army guys because we're so used to east is right and north is up, okay? And you read right and up in maps and stuff. But when you start dealing with Israel and the Bible, up means uphill to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is on a hill, on a mountain, Mount Zion. And when you're going up, you're going to Jerusalem, whether you're going north, south, east, or west. And when you're going down, you're going away from Jerusalem. It's kind of just a little thing here. And he says, on this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats, and the finest of wines. I think we even know somebody else who thought that weddings were important. That banquets were important. Jesus, he even turned water into wine, because these are important events. He doesn't mention Jesus here, but maybe he's alluding a little bit to that. And he says, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats, and the finest of wines. And there's some people that say, what is he pointing to here? And if you go look at Revelation 19, they talk about something called the wedding supper of the Lamb, where Jesus is married to his church, and it's a big banquet. I got thinking about wedding supper. Y'all know which meal supper is, right? Is it the one in, I'm from Georgia, supper is at night, but that was the big meal of the day. Everybody was out, picking cotton or doing something in the daytime, so lunch was just something to get you through the day. But dinners, we call it supper, that was the big meal. Now we kind of dismiss supper as, maybe we'll have a snack or something later for supper and then keep eating it all the way through Netflix programs and all the other stuff. Okay, but the wedding supper of the Lamb, it's a pointer to something maybe in Revelation. There's a lot of people think that he's starting to hint at that here in Isaiah. It says, on this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. You know what a shroud is? Something put over dead people? Cover dead people with? Except that he's, say again? Isn't it a dead body? Yeah, a shroud is the cover that goes over the dead body, yeah. So he's talking about the shroud. It's not just over a dead body, it's over peoples, over nations. Over there. And what is the shroud that he is talking about here? Okay? And he says he will destroy it. So if he's going to destroy the cover that you would put over dead people or dead nations or dead philosophies or dead anything, let's see if there's anything else about it. It goes on to say, he will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace. From all the earth, the Lord has spoken. You're starting maybe getting a little New Testament stuff lingering out here. Maybe there was somebody who's going to come, a Savior who will do some things for us. And the issue, the shroud is caused by what? It's caused by sin and people's unwillingness to turn away from it. Sin is fun, or at least it was to those people. Sin is fun, and they're, the drinking, all the other things, which I'm not going to mention here to keep it PG. There are all kinds of things you can do with sin, and people were unwilling to turn away from it. He said he will remove his people's disgrace. And what is that disgrace? The disgrace is their sin. They liked sin. They kept doing it. They knew about God. There was a temple in town on the mountain. They knew about him, but were they following him? No, that is their disgrace. Okay? And how will he remove it? I mean, how do you remove all this? Well, you could turn a blind eye to it. You could forgive the people. Maybe there's the answer. Forgive the people, but how do you forgive them? God's not just going to give. Well, it'd be pretty easy. You could say so many Hail Marys tonight, and maybe it's done. Or he could have a Savior come. I think that's where we're pointing to. But Isaiah does this in such a delicate way as he lays this story out for us. I looked over at, based on what we're just reading, I looked over at 1 Corinthians. He says, when the perishable, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Remember, he said he was going to get rid of that shroud. He was going to destroy that shroud. And all of a sudden, Paul picks up on that when he writes Corinthians. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin. There's that disgrace. Okay. And the power of sin is the law. You know what that means? You don't know if you're sinning unless there's a law that you're violating. Okay. So we Jews, or those Jews then, they loved laws, because then you could point out a person's sin because you say you're violating the law. Okay? They started with 10, but they said that wasn't enough. They made a few more. But thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now that's written by Paul in Corinthians in the New Testament, and there is kind of, I think, that answer that Isaiah is pointing to when in that last part of that we were just reading in Isaiah. So what is Isaiah saying? What are the people hearing? It's one thing for Isaiah to say something, and because it is prophecy, sometimes he's saying something that's going to come true later. Sometimes he says something and you're trying to think, what is he talking about? And you don't realize it's not something that's going to happen today. It's going to happen in the future. He says, in that day, okay, they will say, in that day, which is out there somewhere, surely this is our God. In that day they will say, surely this is our God. We trusted in him and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. Wow, salvation. Have we seen that word in Isaiah before? Salvation? I don't know. Deliverance from, and salvation means deliverance from sin and its consequences. Okay? How do you make that happen? This is, we could almost pull this little verse out of here and put it over in the New Testament, couldn't we? Yeah. But Isaiah he's a prophet. He's talking about the future. There you go. Why does, all of a sudden, everything is starting to turn rosy there, I thought. He's talked about the bad stuff, and then he has some positive stuff. We're going to have salvation. God's going to turn things around for us, give us some opportunities. And then in the last verse or two, he starts talking about Moab. Moab. Why are we going back to that? He's already done a whole chapter on it, like chapter 13, I think, or 13 or 14. I forgot which one it was. And so I asked myself the question, why is he doing that? And he said, it's in verse 10, he says, the hand of the Lord will rest on this mountain, meaning Mount Zion, but Moab, which is out to the east, you don't have that. I'll show you a map in a second. But Moab will be trampled in their land as straw is trampled down in the manure. They will stretch out their hands in it as swimmers stretch out their hands to swim. God will bring down their pride. Pride, there's the pride word. Okay, despite the cleverness of their hands, he will bring down their high fortified walls. He said your high fortified walls, but he means theirs, Moab's. And lay them low. He will bring them down to the ground, to the very dust. So let's take a little look here at the map just to see where is Moab. You kind of see Jerusalem out there, and Moab is over to the right. It's the red part out there. And I thought maybe he really doesn't like Moab. He wrote a whole chapter about it, back in chapter 14, and now he's bringing it up again. He really doesn't like Moab and the people that are over there, and so it kind of makes you question, what is there about Moab that's so bad? So as you go back and look at it, you remember Lot? Remember Abraham and Lot and all those guys, and Sodom and Gomorrah? There's a couple of things. Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, and Lot's wife got a little salty there before it was all over, because she turned back and looked as things were being destroyed. He did get away. Lot did get away with 2 of his daughters, by the way. Yeah, and I'll just remind you of that story in Genesis 19. He had 2 daughters, and they were afraid that their line was not going to exist anymore because it was just Lot and them. And in order to preserve their genealogy, they volunteered to go have sexual relations with Dad, with Lot, okay? And they had children. Guess what the name of one of the children was? Moab, and Moab. Keep in mind that Sodom and Gomorrah is down at the bottom. It's just to the left side there of the pink area. And it's kind of in Moab, but down in the very southwest corner of it. And so Sodom and Gomorrah and Moab, they have some stuff there. The country is named for, the illegitimate, I don't know, incestuous. The incestuous child, yes, okay. They're of, what a sad situation. It's almost like it's doomed, right, from the beginning. So let's see if I can find anything else good to say about Moab. It was home of Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, the other thing they did in Moab, when the people came out of Egypt and they were heading to the Promised Land, they needed to cross Moab, and you know what? The Moabites said, not here, no entry. We don't want you guys here. They made it very tough on the people, and because of that, when Moses and crew were writing all the laws in Deuteronomy and everything, it said in chapter 23, it said, no Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. Wow, that's a long ways down there. Not even the current Moabites when they came out of Egypt, or 10 generations down. Those people, we don't want them. We don't want them. They can't go in the assembly of the Lord. For they did not come to meet you with the bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt. And then he skips down a few verses. Then he says, do not seek a treaty of friendship with them as long as you live. So this, I'm sure that Isaiah, who probably was a good scholar and knew all the Old Testament stuff, took this to heart and said, you know what, we're not going to deal with those Moabites. I don't care how good they are now. Okay. Solomon built high places for their gods. He actually had some Moabite wives, and those wives worshipped those false gods, to include the ones that wanted child sacrifice. And even Solomon built some statues to them. So there's a lot of history there. You remember when Abraham and Lot, they had gone down to Egypt together. When they came back, they said, we both have big businesses, shepherds and all this other stuff. And he said, the land just won't support both of us. One of us goes one way, one goes the other. And he said, Lot, I'm going to let you choose, and I'll take the other one. That was what Abraham said. And of course, which one did Lot pick? He picked Moab. Now, why did he pick Moab? Because Moab was the Napa Valley. It really was. All the wine, it's the beautiful country and everything. And I guess what's surprising is Abraham bought into that. He said, I'll let you pick, and I'll take the other one. So Abraham did Canaan area, did what's Israel, Judah area, and Lot went over there and just loved all the agricultural stuff and everything that was going on over there across the Jordan River over there in Moab. So, do you know what? When everything is so rosy like that, you tend to kind of like puff up a little bit. You get a little pride in what you're doing and what you have and everything. And that is essentially what had happened to the Moabites the whole time. They were really happy with the way things were going for them. But one thing they didn't do is give God any credit for it. And they even rebelled against the people in Judah and Judea. There was even some battles fought which the Moabites lost, and one of the conditions were they were supposed to pay tribute to Judah and to the temple, and they never did do it. And Isaiah was unhappy about that. He said, "You guys, you never did your duty." I went back and looked at 2 Kings chapter 3. It said in about 850 BC, 100 years before Isaiah here, okay, God, through the prophet Elijah, remember him? He commanded the combined armies of Israel and Judah to overthrow all the fortified cities and major towns of the Moabites, cut down every good tree, block the Moabite springs, fill up the fields of the Moabites with the stones from the city's walls so that the fields would not be fit for agriculture, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And you know why they didn't do it? They felt sorry for the Moabites because the king there, his son, he was going to sacrifice his son to one of their gods over this deal. And the Judean and the Israeli and Judean kings decided, no, we're not going to completely do what God told us to do, which is completely wipe them out. So we continue to have Napa Valley over there, right up into Isaiah's time. I went back to Isaiah 16 too. Moab is told in Isaiah 16, this is after the chapter on Moab. He says Moab is told to restart sending tribute to Jerusalem, which it had failed to do for 100 years. And he said, save yourselves, submit to Jerusalem. And Judah is also admonished to take care of its Moabite relatives who are seeking refuge. Remember, in Isaiah 16, he's talking about the Assyrians come in. Guess what? Even though Judea is on the main highway going south, and the Assyrians want to go all the way to Egypt, so is Moab. And so the Assyrians are going through Moab, and while they're doing it, they're uprooting everything there. And those people are fleeing. Some of them are even fleeing over into Judea. And Isaiah does say, hey, as bad as those Moabites are, remember we need to take care of those people if they're fleeing the Assyrian destruction. And he does point out in chapter 16 that Moab's sin is pride, which seems to be a recurring theme throughout the Bible. If you want to know what you shouldn't do, is be careful about pride. And that is, it's one thing to sin. What all does sin mean? But if pride is the sin, boy, that's one that God does not like. Let's see. I thought I'd say one more thing about Moab. Moab carried in references in Zephaniah 2. Okay, this is still about 70 years down the road from where we're at right now with Isaiah. Zephaniah says, I have heard the insults of Moab and the taunts of the Ammonites, who insulted my people and made threats against their land. Therefore, as surely as I live, declares the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, surely Moab will become like Sodom, the Ammonites like Gomorrah, a place of weeds and salt pits, a wasteland forever. The remnant of my people will plunder them. The survivors of my nation will inherit their land. This is what they will get in return for their pride, for insulting and mocking the people of the Lord Almighty. Okay, I thought a few of those things kind of puts Moab in perspective. They don't like Moab. And I think I gave you enough info to understand why they don't. Okay. There were a few positives about Moab. Remember Ruth, the Moabite? Boaz married Ruth, but he married her after she came back out of Moab, and when Naomi brought her back, and there's the line of Jesse and David and Christ and everything is through Ruth, and she was a Moabite princess. It doesn't say princess in the Bible, but it does. But if you go and look at the oral tradition for the Jewish people, they do say, she and her sister both came from a high-level group, royalty in Moab. Let's see. Yeah, and I do remember when King Saul was running after David, when David was on he was trying to flee from Saul because he didn't want to kill Saul. He could have killed Saul anytime, and he just felt like that's not the right thing to kill his king. Because God appointed Saul king. So he says, I'm not going to be the one to do that. So instead he kept fleeing, and while he was fleeing, Saul was after him. He was after his parents, and David actually took his parents and hid them away, and he pleaded with the king in Moab to actually look after his parents. So there were some good things about Moab, but not good enough to keep Isaiah from pointing all of these other things that I just done out. And then I reinforced that wine country.
Up from the grave he arose, where the mighty triumph o'er his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose. He arose. He arose. Hallelujah.